You probably shoot with one of these or with your cell phone and you're looking to level up. Or you already have a DSLR or mirrorless and want to get more out of it by learning how to record in manual. Well, I got some tips right here for you to help you get started. Let's get into it.
Break.
Yes, welcome. My name is Ryan and I'm a videographer and photographer based in Toronto, Canada, and this is Clutch Creativity, where I share tips from my creative journey to help you level up and also build a community where we can learn from each other. Today I got 7 settings that you need to check every time you want to shoot on your DSLR or mirrorless camera. These are settings I check every time I use my camera, and if you master these basic settings, you're on the road to getting some crispy video every time you shoot. Disclaimer: these are an overview for people who are newer to these kinds of cameras. This also assumes that you have your memory card, your battery, and your lens attached properly. But I'm sure you figured that part out. The first setting you want to check is your frame rate. If you want your video to look cinematic, basically looking like movies that you watch on Netflix, choose 24 frames per second. Some cameras also show 23.98, but that's the same thing. 30 frames per second is good too, but I prefer 24 frames per second. If you want to do any kind of slow motion in the editing, then you need to choose at least 60 frames per second. That's going to capture more single images per second, which will allow you to slow down your motion and let it be smooth and not choppy. The next setting you want to check is connected to your frame rate. That's your shutter speed. Your shutter speed should generally be set to double the frame rate or as close to that as possible. For example, if you shoot 24 frames per second, then you should have a shutter speed of 1/48. We don't have that on these cameras, so we choose the closest thing, which is 1/50. Likewise, if you choose 60 frames per second, then you should double that to 120, or in the case of your DSLR, 125. Now, sometimes you're going to be shooting in very bright situations like broad daylight, and you may not be able to change the settings in order to get the picture to not be too bright. The general advice is to get something called ND filters, but if you don't have those, then you can crank that shutter speed up the same way you would do in photography. Film nerds and camera snobs don't like that, but don't worry. It's better for you to lock in your exposure and have a slight choppiness than to have overexposed footage, or use your aperture in such a way that makes your footage look like cell phone camera video anyway. Don't worry, your camera won't explode. What you film and your story is way more important. Speaking of aperture, that's the next setting. Generally, if you want that sweet, smooth background, then you need to shoot in the lowest aperture possible or available to your lens. However, that may not always be the best option. When you're choosing your aperture, think to yourself, do I want my subject to be in focus and have everything else blurry, or do I want my background to also be in focus because it's important for both the subject and the background to be clear? If you want just the subject to be clear, use a lower number on your aperture, and vice versa if you want your background to be a part of the image. Sometimes having the focus too shallow can be distracting, so choose wisely. The next setting is your ISO. Your ISO increases the light sensitivity of your sensor, so you should probably set that after you've done the previous 3. Higher ISO numbers will make your image brighter, but it comes at a cost: noise or graininess. With that said, the general advice is to keep your ISO number as low as possible for what you need. Consider your lighting situation to help out in that regard. Setting number 5 is your white balance. Your white balance is basically how blue or how orange your image looks. Lots of entry-level cameras will have presets like sunny, incandescent, fluorescent, shade, etc. However, I recommend you use the manual Kelvin setting if it's available on your camera. The manual Kelvin setting will allow you to dial in the color of your image based on the light around you as close as possible to your desired outcome. This is important because video is not like photography. In photos, especially when you shoot RAW, it's really easy to change the white balance for your image even if you don't shoot it correctly. But with video, lots of that color and contrast is baked right into the image and it's really hard to get rid of. So it's important for you to get your image looking as close to what you imagine in the final product as possible. If the lights around you are more orange, you'll definitely use a lower Kelvin number. And if the light is more blue, then you'll crank it higher. But really, you just need to match what you see at the back of your camera with what you see with your eyes. That will get you most of the way, if not be enough to shoot through most shooting situations. I'll save the advanced techniques for white balance for another video. If your camera doesn't have a manual Kelvin setting, then use a preset that best represents the light around you or what you want your shots to look like in your final product. I strongly discourage the auto white balance when possible. You want to tell your camera what to do and not have the camera guess what you want. It's not going to read your mind. Before I jump into number 6, if you're getting value from this video, please like the video. And if you'd like to see more content like this or like to hear more from me, then hit that subscribe button so that you can know when the next video is coming out. Bruh. Thanks, guys. On to setting number 6. That's your picture profile. Your picture profile is the color attributes of the image, whether it has more contrast, sharpness, vibrancy, etc., etc. Generally, if you want to have the most flexibility when you're coloring and grading your shots later on, you should choose the flattest and simplest color profile you have to get the most control. If you're not interested in doing color grading, one of the preloaded profiles could work too. Go through them and see which one you like because they all have different attributes and they vary, whether that's more contrast, higher emphasis on certain colors, or even more sharpness. Side note, once you choose your picture profile, you may want to go back and check the exposure because it will affect it a little bit. So make sure that your whites are not too bright and your blacks still have details. Black tones matter. And finally, your microphone volume. Video is 50% sound, so don't forget about that. Whether you have an external mic plugged into your camera or you're using your built-in mic, you want to make sure that the mic levels stay away from the yellows and the reds, especially the reds. As a rule of thumb, DSLRs and mirrorless cameras don't have very good sound capturing capabilities, so you want to try and have an external mic or record your important sound from a different source. However, let's be realistic. You don't always have your microphone on you, and it's not always a good situation to have a mic on, like if you're trying to be more discreet, for example. Or sometimes you just need reference audio so that you can synchronize your other sound with the camera sound later on. In such a case, lower or raise the volume to make sure that your mic is coming through loud enough but not getting distorted. Guys, I was holding back on this one to keep it short, but if you have any questions or want to follow up on anything I mentioned here, don't hesitate to comment down below and reach out to me on the gram, and I'd love to answer your questions. If you know anybody who's starting out in their DSLR video journey, share this with them. I check these 7 settings every time I turn on my camera, whether it's for professional work, in events, or just my own personal documenting, and I'm very happy with the results that I get. While you wait for the next video, why not watch some additional content? See you in the next episode. Bye.